Well, welcome to the Seraphine Podcast. I'm just going to go into it because this is becoming now, this is now for me, not only a great way for two friends to sit across from each other and kind of go through. Now our mask mandate is until January, I think 16th. And, you know, it was funny. That's not funny. It was sad that I had all those George Floyd t-shirts that we made for the protests. And they were sitting, you know, when you come into my home, these boxes were there. And we had fully planned on going to like voter registration and just had the shirts there. Mm-hmm. And then we had some guests come over and Johnny's like, you know, we probably should go store them in our storage unit. And then, you know, when people are coming out for voting, we'll bring them out. Sure. Anyway, then 2 days ago, was it 2 days ago? I mean, another shooting. Mm-hmm. And I'm like at a point where I'm like, I don't know. It's going into trauma.
It is trauma.
It is trauma.
For everyone, regardless of color, it's trauma.
It is. It's a lot to.
Because we see it on video and it becomes dehumanizing almost. Because like you said, we get that tagline, oh, another one. Look, another police shooting. And we're just waiting on it. We're watching.
Yeah.
And yes, it's trauma.
As you're going through your training, so you're online kind of, and I hate to say crash course because again, it's like people need to be doing this on a constant basis, mm-hmm. but in the next breath.
And there are some people, side note, that have come all 3 months.
That's good.
Yeah, and they've been ramping up because every month is a little different. And this month, I think I'm going to focus on just this notion of law and order, right? Equal justice under the law, whatever that means, and how we kind of dismantle that and look at just the differences between like what happened. You had an active shooter, right, mm-hmm. respond to the riot with a gun in hand,
yep.
kills 2 people, walks toward the police with his automatic weapon, and then gets to go home unscathed. That's infuriating.
Oh, it is. It's to a point to where it's so sickening that I don't. The processing for me now is to a point to where I get so depressed and I get so angry, and then I'm trying. Like I watched the Republican convention this week because I was like, I just wanna see who are the people who are standing next to this man, mm-hmm. and say that you want him to be our president. Mm-hmm. And I think the hardest thing for me to watch was when Black men and Black women came and spoke. And one was, I forget her name, Kim Kardashian helped her get her prison sentence down. I think she was in jail. She was supposed to have a life sentence. She was basically like a phone call person to set people up with a drug deal. Mm-hmm. But she was not, that was all she was doing. She was on the telephone. And they gave her the harshest sentence. And then Kim Kardashian got a letter from her pleading, can you help me? Can you help me? And then Donald Trump decides, all right, we're going to let her go. And then he makes conveniently, after the shooting, this full pardoning of her, like does this photo op with her. Mm-hmm. And I see her thanking him, and I understand why she's so grateful. And I'm looking at the justice reform that he has implemented in the past couple years. But it doesn't translate to me. Like it doesn't translate. I need to wrap my head around the fact that he doesn't understand that the problem is coming within the communities that have been neglected.
Sure.
So
neglected, and just we insert this line always, more likely to, right? More likely to be arrested, or more likely to be killed, more likely to not have access to equal health care. And if you look at that as a whole, I think he just neglects to look at that as a whole. So you can pick these, a few people who sometimes can be known as tokenism, right? Yeah. So that you're able to say, I really helped Sally over there, Mm-hmm. She's going to get up and she's going to speak for me. And that just gives the illusion that there's reform happening, there's change. As the occupant keeps saying, I have done more for Black people than any other president. Every time he says it, it literally makes my skin crawl.
Literally.
Like a physical, visceral reaction. And, without even making mention to people like John Lewis, or looking at how he always talks about good trouble, right? This John Lewis and this notion of good trouble, and how we're able to ask the questions and issue the challenges that help people get uncomfortable. Like, how uncomfortable do you have to get before you actually do something? Pushing people to the edge. And that's what we're trying to do, for sure.
Yeah. And I think I've noticed that more than ever in the last, I don't know, just from starting the podcast up until literally today. I was in the car driving back from the Ozarks, which was super uncomfortable, and really understanding how just doing something like this podcast has polarized me from people in my own life.
Yeah. That ride down to the Ozarks is just oppressive, right?
Yeah.
Through mid-Missouri.
Oh, it is.
It's kind of scary.
It's a weird feeling, and it's a weird feeling to have people who are even family members of mine. I mean, my own family members were like, you called yourself a racist and you put it on camera, and you can never take that back. And you're a reflection of us. And I made the commercial for the podcast, and one of my family members said to me, well, why weren't you queenly? Like when they saw you with your arms up and these beautiful profile shots of you. And then they view me like being funny and, doing the flirty camera thing. And it just broke my heart that it was completely a judgment call on, well, you have this podcast and you need to be this together journalist, and you need to, and completely play a part and a stereotype. And I'm really fucking tired of stereotypes. I've had a stereotype of being, you look a certain way, or you're fake, or you're this or you're that. And to me, vulnerability is so important. And I think that we're so used to polarizing people sure. You have to be good, you have to be bad.
It's all black and white, right? There's never any in between.
No.
You have to find that balance.
And it's so disappointing when you see the disappointment in people's eyes that you care about.
Like your family.
Yeah.
Issuing the challenges to your family, I mean, that's a big deal, because when we're talking about social justice, we're talking about something that has happened for generations, right? So my mother and my father think about this a totally different way. My mom's the same way, she's like, she kind of got on me when she listened to the first episode because I made a reference about affirmative action and, how she got the notion that I was saying it didn't really do anything, and, well, you shouldn't say things like that, and ask me about the workshops and things, that I'm saying on the news and that sort of thing. And I'm like, Mom, this is good trouble. I'm supposed to be saying these things. I'm supposed to be messing with people, as she calls it, because I'm uncomfortable. And other people should know what that feels like, whether it's in the workplace or when I walk into Walgreens and I can't find anything to do my hair with, and I have to find some other outlet for, just finding representations of myself. That's a big deal. And in the world that she lived in, it was okay because we have these opportunities, but this is a whole nother generation and a whole nother level. And then even when we're looking at the protests now, these are like young white kids that are protesting. So they're thinking of things way different than their parents are thinking of them. And so there's a new school of thought that's coming with each generation. And I think that we just need to kind of like take parts of what happened to our parents' experience and kind of build upon that to just create something totally new.
Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't make it hurt any less.
I agree.
I think that's the hardest part, is when you feel like this is something, that I did, that I'm really, saying, like, even being proud.
Yeah.
Like, so many people are like, well, it's either you're too humble or, you need to, it's like, fucking hell. I just want to be proud of something I did.
For sure.
And that I'm doing and that I'm learning and that I'm making the attempt, because it's all in the attempt. Because if I fuck up and fail, I guess I look at it as
being on the right side of history.
Yeah. Well, and again, if I fuck up and fail, at least I'm going to have the learning curve of, you could have done this better.
Sure.
I think the hard part is when people play it safe to a point to where, like I had it 2 weeks ago where I didn't want to get out. I just didn't want to get out of the house. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to talk anymore because I had felt like I had opened myself up, and the very people that I was hoping that would be like, and again, it's not like because I want a big pat on the back. It's just you don't want to feel alone.
Sure.
And
the people who raised you, the people who instilled these values that you're now like acting on your own values that were so foundational for your family. So in a way, it's like you be proud of it because your parents taught you something, but you have to change that, to match your own mindset and what's happening in the moment, like in contemporary culture. Yeah. And that's important. And I think another thing that I've been thinking about with people who can't seem to find like empathy for social justice and things that are going on, I'm asking myself, if you don't agree with what's happening, if you don't agree with the fact that there are systemic issues that need to be eradicated, the least you could do is see that there's a group of people who are in pain and ask yourself, what can I do about that? Or why is this so important? Why are other humans hurting? I think that's kind of a way that you could approach it too, So
when in this time since we've started doing this together, when have you felt the loneliest, and when have you felt like anything like it's like there's so many possibilities, like I'm not in this alone?
Sure. I think I started to feel lonely in those first few weeks when we started having these conversations. The conversations are fulfilling to a certain extent because how does the healer heal, if that makes sense? Yeah. Right? So I'm giving, not just here, but everywhere, my workshop, it's 3 hours of difficult conversations and asking questions and answering questions and learning from other people, taking on other people's energy. I know that you can understand that because you've been doing this with other people, and you start to feel lonely at the end because you have to like kind of rest and go within and find something to recharge yourself. And sometimes I have problems recharging because I have problems like asking people for things or like being vulnerable. So yeah, I felt lonely just at the end of each process. I have to kind of refuel.
How does I want to go back to when you felt like the possibility, but I'm putting a pin in that. How is it with your mate? Like, I think the one thing that's been so crazy about this journey is my own husband, because he's had to face so many things about himself. And he sees the disappointment in my eyes when I want him to answer the question differently, or if we're around some of his friends who make a off-color comment or tease me about, well, I mean, it's like now not a joke, but it's like I've now put myself in a box.
Yeah, for sure.
And
that dynamic has to be interesting, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling, and I don't want to be hard on him because he's had so much growth in a short period of time. But I can only imagine. I mean, because us as friends, we've been out with our mates, and I see it in both of them. Like, I see that sense of like
they found common ground.
Yeah.
They smiled. They hung out by themselves afterwards, secretly. Like, what was that about?
I loved it.
I did too.
I loved it
for sure.
I also feel that. I also feel though that sense in both of them of like wanting to hold the space, but not completely understanding, like the drive behind it. Like, just take a breath, girl.
Sure. Calm down a little bit, right? He's always telling me that regardless of what the situation is. So I think for us, it's been interesting because these are conversations we have our whole lives. Yeah. These are conversations that we grew up having with our grandparents and with our parents. And so for it to be kind of in the forefront right now, I think he's really proud of me because like that's what I went to school for. So we've been having this whole conversation and even arguments, financially over the past few years. Well, like, you did all of these things in school, doctor this, and now you're like a minimum wage yoga teacher, right? Like, what's up with that? Well, this is how the healer heals. This is me coming back in and finding something different. But when COVID hit and these conversations hit and I pulled something off the shelf and now it's like, it's the thing. And I'm like, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
Doctor's back. That took about 1 month. Thanks.
Yeah.
And it's about like the timeliness of the work and the timeliness of what's happening right now, the call to action and answering the call and knowing where your niche is, right?
Yeah.
That's important.
And be reminded of the things that can sometimes be forgotten. It's not that it's like when I think about myself as a kid, right? I think about that joy and that like sense of play and that sense of
discovery.
Yeah, and just innocence. Mm-hmm. Like there was no layers. And then, you go through these different phases of life. And I think the thing that happened for me was that sense of passion, and it's not play because my innocence is gone. Like it's it's all there, but there is a sense of drive and inspiration and fearlessness that I can only attribute it to like when you're on the playground and you're doing the monkey bars.
Totally, for the first time.
And like it's gonna hurt your hands and you're gonna try and make it across, and you just have to like just let your body swing and get into it. And it's that muscle memory, emotional memory of like who you are inside. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when, when you describe like taking the book off the shelf and then it's like, oh, no, it was always there.
Yeah.
you know, but it's getting that momentum, you know, as you're going across. So
And the courage.
yeah, and
For
knowing
sure.
that you can go there, but it's that moment halfway where you're freaking hanging on, and you're like, "Why did I do this? I could have just gone on the merry-go-round and sat
Could
my
have
ass
taken
down and
the
gone in
easy
circles."
way out,
Right? So crazy. So, has there been a moment or moments where you have just been like, even though we're in kind of crazy times and they're uncomfortable, have you had moments of just like hope or transcendence of like we're changing, we're evolving, we're going somewhere? Or do you still feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back?
I feel a little bit of both. I think that there's progress as long as the conversation continues to happen. And the conversation is continuing to happen because people keep getting shot. And, you know, the circumstances keep extenuating themselves. So as long as the dialogue continues to happen, it has to be followed up by action, theory versus practicum, and continuing to learn. So just kind of helping people grasp that, you know, in new ways.
Yeah. You know, you challenged me last week to look at artists.
Yes.
And I was looking at the 70s and 80s, and I looked even just on like Wikipedia just to see like what came up. And it was interesting how even the way it came up, it wasn't that much. Like that actually made me.
That was part of the challenge.
It was, and especially when I think about the kind of art I'm attracted to, because I've always been. I think one of the first artists that ever spoke to me was Jackson Pollock because of his chaos, right? So Mark Bradford is like, for me right now, I'm so. I know he's not from the 70s or 80s, and the thing is I want to sit with a book and I just want to look and feel and immerse myself like I did with Basquiat. Like for me, I just get lost in it. And I was looking through and I was like, okay, nothing is coming to me the way I thought that it would, because you Google artists that are white or from the Renaissance or what, and it's
endless.
It's endless, and millions of pictures come up, but you have to deep dive, and then you have to dive some more.
Yeah.
And then the collections, they're housed in certain museums, and there's only a few.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people who own the art.
Yep.
Which I'm like,
And
they don't want to share.
Who owns the art too? That's a whole nother layer of an issue.
It's, no kidding who owns the art. And I think the thing that really bothers me, because I was going back to Basquiat, is Andy Warhol and the way that he treated Basquiat, and this whole kind of tokenism.
Yeah.
And just the sadness that I feel, because I've looked at pop art too, and I've been like, okay, I remember seeing the Marilyn Monroe pictures as a young girl. And then, I've consumed a lot about Andy Warhol because I've actually thought he was kind of a toxic human being. And I know a lot of people want to argue about different figures, but there's a lot of male artists and a lot of white male artists. I mean, I went back to even just when I was looking up art, I'm like, how much art is
the beginning of time?
God, and it's all naked women.
Yep.
It's like naked women were hanging out our tits out.
No.
Oh, here I am. I'm in the woods naked. I mean, like we're all like the women are just like objectified.
For sure.
And then when you look at African American art, it's either buried, or if you find it, there's a few key pieces, and it just feels so controlled. So to me, I guess
stories get controlled too.
They do.
So I love Margaret Burroughs.
All right.
From Chicago. She was the founder of the Southside Community Arts Center, which is a beautiful center in Bronzeville in Chicago. And she's just talking about a powerful female figure. I have a couple of her pieces in my personal collection.
Wow.
And she is just a dynamic person. She used to also work at the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. So like what Black artists would do in Chicago is like go to the School of the Art Institute, which was downtown, and then bring those lessons back, basically like to the hood, and then reteach at the Southside Community Arts Center or other places. So she's really good from the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and then maybe even a little earlier. Guerrilla Girls will really speak to what you were just saying about just like women in art, and I'll let you look it up. You'll really love that though. It really just speaks out against everything you said, men and naked women in art, and that whole notion of that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah. So,
and it's funny because it's not that I don't appreciate the female figure. I love it, but I also think it's so.
It's demeaning. It's demeaning. We can do more than be beautiful.
Yeah, I mean the painters that are like considered to be like the big ones, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like when you think of the Da Vinci's, and I mean, like you look at this art, and I'm like, what the fuck? This is
objectification of the woman.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm definitely. I wanted actually to ask you, because when I went on Wikipedia, it just felt so
like bare.
it felt bare, and it also didn't feel connective, because I remember the moment that I learned about Basquiat and just feeling something.
He's like the Martin Luther King of art.
Yeah.
One thing that they always teach you,
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's tough because it's a strong imagery, and I love modern art. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard for me to look at past modern art. I don't know what it, and I'm trying to open up those doors, and I don't know what it is about the emotional connectivity for me with modern art, and like the rage of like splattering and graffiti. Yes. It's like it's very angry, and I'm not an angry person.
It's expressive too, though.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's crazy to think about what we're attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
If you could tell me, like, 3 pieces of art that you're like, they have just, like, you will revisit and look at it, and it just feels like every time you look at it, you see something new. It changes you.
So a Black artist comes to mind from Chicago, Archibald Motley Jr.
Okay.
And he has a portrait of essentially a Chicago juke joint. And it's just such a beautiful portrayal of just Black people just enjoying life in the 20s and 30s. I can't think of the name of the piece right now, but it's extraordinary. And I always come back to that piece. Let's see. Margaret Burroughs, as I mentioned earlier, one of the pieces that I own is called The Three Faces of Life. And she was a printmaker. So these are like beautiful prints of like 3 different faces put together. And one has similar to kind of like the drama faces with the happy and the sad. But there's one in the middle that's neutral as well. Yeah. And so I think it always reminds me of coming back to neutrality, right?
Yeah.
That's very important. And let's see. Oh, I love Brancusi. Yeah. He is a sculptor, and I've seen some of his pieces like in Venice and in other places, and I just love like Bird and the way you hit a corner and you just know it's a Brancusi, and it just makes this feeling of literally a flight. I think that's one of the pieces that I love, flight. Yeah. So
I love knowing what speaks to people. It's like music. Mm-hmm. You when someone is like, you've got to hear this song. Mm-hmm. And it's like they don't want you to say one word because they want you to hear every note.
Tune in.
I was with my husband last night, and we were just sitting outside with the dogs, and I love classical music, and I love movie scores. And it was hilarious because I realize how important it is you know, when I think about where we're at right now, and like healers who need healing, and these little moments in life to where it's either a painting, or it's listening to music with your loved one, or it's just having a warm cup of tea and just feeling that moment of just
Yes, a disconnect.
Yeah.
For sure. I love classical music too. I used to play viola.
I did too. That's crazy.
Seriously?
Viola. I did it for 2 years, and then I stopped. We were talking about instruments last night. I asked my husband, I said, you know, if you could play any instrument, what would it be?
Such a rare instrument too.
It is.
I can't believe we have that
same.
connection.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I played for like 12 years, and then before I went to Mizzou, I had to choose between orchestra and art and visual art.
Oh, that's wild. I wonder, do you think you could pick it up and play it?
Well, I actually got in touch with my my orchestra teacher recently from high school and middle school for 7 years, and I played upright bass too for about 4 years, and so we had lunch recently, and she slid me a bass book. She's like, "It's time, you know, get back in." She plays 30 plus instruments and just an amazing person. So I'm encouraged by her, and I think maybe soon. I don't know.
Yeah, those are the things that I don't know. There's
so much more life left.
There is. And it's like, why not? Why not?
Yeah.
And especially now where I think, you know, as we continue to keep having these conversations, I think where I've come is this point of just, I love connecting and understanding the people in my life and all the facets of them. And I realize how little I utilize my time. And I would spend most of my conversations on things that were pleasant and great.
Yeah.
But I've really felt so lucky to get to know you in this way.
Need some substance.
Yeah.
A little challenge.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty
and then
cool.
Sprinkle some beauty on it, you know? Right?
Yeah, totally. Well, I know that you're going to be coming up. Your body's going through some stuff, and I know you're going to be a little bit out of commission for a little bit, so we probably won't see each other for like a month.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then when I get back, I really want to talk about health and wellness.
Yes.
The healer is healing right now, so I'm not totally in a place where I want to divulge it all, but I promise you next time I will. Yeah. That's a little upcoming. And then I think it just really connects to what happened recently, the Black Panther passing.
Chadwick Boseman.
Yes, I would be remiss if I did not mention that regarding health and wellness. My father also died of colon cancer in 2007. And so this just happened a few days ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that you and I should reconnect just on like Black health or just health in general, women's health, right? Because
100%.
like my issue is very unique to women, and women in fitness, it is just like a no-go. And so just health and wellness is important.
Yeah.
So I hope you and I can reconnect
for sure on that.
And as he rests in power, and remember just like such a young age, right? And just looking at him, just a specimen, literally playing a superhero and fighting a battle just in your own life. And so,
and how he went above and beyond.
Yep.
I mean, that's, I think, where I love this podcast.
Yes.
Is I realize how many people, again, you can know them and you can have these conversations, but really listening and really understanding like what calls to their heart, or what calls to their soul, or what's affected them is just, it's such, it just gives life so much more meaning when you understand the why, the who, the where, what makes up this.
Yes.
You know? So
For sure.
I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm so glad to call you my friend.
Me too.
Checking in with the
I'm so
doctor.
happy you're doing this.
I'm so happy I'm doing it too.
The doctor's going to divulge so much more.
Yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Well, thank you for eavesdropping in. This has been a little bit more of a personal conversation, but I hope the more that you listen to the podcast right now, again, there's not like 1 million subscribers, which
we'll
again,
get there. Next month. We're looking to hit 1 million subscribers next
yeah, right.
month, manifesting.
I'm manifesting it all, but I guess I just encourage you to obviously like, subscribe, keep listening, but also whoever you are with tonight, this afternoon, whenever you're listening to this podcast, think about a question or something that you want to know about the person that you have lunch with or a person that you work with, and really listen, because people surprise you how amazing they are. There's more good in this world than there is bad. I do believe that. So, I agree. Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. You are such the fiend.
Yeah, I am the fiend all over the frickin' place. Oh, well, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on the other side.